Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into a really fascinating legal drama out of India. It's this clash, really, between artistic freedom and, well, very strong public feelings. And it all led to a major Supreme Court decision that honestly had us talking quite a bit. Picture this. One single comment just explodes, right? Stops a huge movie in its tracks, forces the highest court in India to get involved. So our mission today, we want to unpack this whole story layer by layer, figure out the real issues behind the thug life controversy that's this film with Kamal Haasan, and see what it tells us about free speech in, a place as diverse and sometimes volatile as India. What really jumped out were these moments where institutions you'd expect to stand strong just seem to buckle.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to look at. It's not just about one film or one comment by a celebrity. The way this whole thing played out and how the courts finally handle it, it says a lot about creative freedom, about the rule of law itself, and frankly, how quickly intimidation can kind of push aside constitutional rights. We're going to dig into some facts that might surprise you and definitely hit some aha moments about balancing cultural pride and basic freedoms.
Okay, let's get right into it. The spark, the very beginning of this firestorm, it came from Kamal Haasan himself, the, 70-year-old Tamil cinema giant, also a politician. He's at this promotional event in Chennai for his film Thug Life, directed by the great Mani Ratnam. And he says this line, just one line, Canada was born out of Tamil. Now, okay, maybe to some that sounds like just a linguistic point, maybe about shared roots, the Dravidian languages. But in Karnataka, wow, it landed like a Molotov cocktail, as some described it. Pro-Canada groups, especially the Karnataka Rakshana Vidayak, they just erupted. They felt he was belittling their language, their culture. It's amazing how fast that escalated, wasn't it?
It really is astonishingly fast. What happened next was this, incredibly rapid and aggressive reaction. The Karnataka Film Chamber of Commerce, the KFCC, which you'd think exists to support films, they jumped right in. They declared this sort of unofficial ban on thug life in Karnataka, basically saying no apology from Hassan, no movie screening. And what's key here is it wasn't a legal ban from the government. No, it was pressure. It was threats, explicit threats of mob violence, vandalism, even arson. And, well, it worked. Theaters in Bengaluru, Mysuru, across the state. Right. They just didn't screen the film when it released nationwide on June 5th, 2025. A classic case of intimidation winning, at least initially.
That's just wild. An unofficial ban enforced by threats. And then the fans. This part is incredible. Tell us what Hassan's fans did when the theaters stayed dark.
Oh, it's quite something. It really shows his massive following. Over 1,000 fans, apparently, from Karnataka. They couldn't see the film at home, right?
Yeah.
So they actually traveled across the border to Huzur in Tamil Nadu, turned a trip to the cinema into, well, you called it a pilgrimage earlier, and that feels about right. They were that determined to see Thug Life. It really puts the whole conflict, the passion involved, into perspective.
A pilgrimage for a movie, that is dedication. And okay, that dedication, that controversy, it inevitably led to the courts. So on June 17th, 2025, a resident in Bengaluru, M. Mahesh Reddy, files a PIL, that's a public interest litigation, directly with the Supreme Court. His argument was clear. This unofficial ban, fueled by these threats, it's an attack on free speech, it's an attack on the rule of law. And he pointed the finger at the Karnataka government, saying they basically failed to protect the theaters from these fringe groups.
And the Supreme Court's reaction, it was swift and very, very firm. The justices, Ujjal Buyan and Manmohan, they didn't hold back. They stated quite forcefully, mobs and vigilante groups cannot be permitted to take over our streets. You could really sense their frustration. They even mentioned this litany of hurt sentiments, this constant cycle of offense-taking that seems to stifle expression in India sometimes. Their patience seemed pretty thin.
Right. And what makes this whole legal angle even more fascinating is comparing that Supreme Court response to how the Karnataka High Court handled it earlier. Hassan's production company, Kamal Films, they'd petitioned the High Court back on June 3rd. What happened there? Because it sounds like a very different approach.
Oh, completely different. Instead of zeroing in on the threats, the violence, the effective ban, Justice M. Nagaprasanna actually questioned Hassan for not apologizing. He literally asked him something like, are you a historian or a linguist to make such a statement? And then suggested, a single apology could have resolved the situation.
Yeah.
He even brought up historical examples like C. Rajagopalachari apologizing decades ago and Rajnikanth during the Kaveri dispute. It was, well, it felt like shifting the blame, didn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like the High Court was almost mediating, pushing Hassan to smooth things over rather than tackling the threats head on. Is that a fair assessment? Feels like a misstep.
I think misstep is fair, yes. In this context, it definitely seemed like prioritizing, maybe, appeasement, over defending clear constitutional rights. The focus was put on Hassan to play nice, essentially, suggesting an apology was the path forward, not enforcing the law against intimidation. But Kamal Haasan, he stood his ground, absolutely refused. He maintained his comment came from genuine affection for Karnataka, no malice intended, and therefore no apology. His firmness was really key here.
And that firm stance seems to be what resonated with the Supreme Court later on. So on June 17th, they took over the case, right? Transferred his petition to themselves.
Exactly. They pulled the case up to the highest court, and then they directly criticized the Karnataka High Court's approach. Justice Guion explicitly said the High Court had no business asking him to apologize. That's a pretty strong rebuke.
Wow.
It's a clear signal that the court's job is protecting rights, not brokering apologies under duress.
So then came the big ruling from the Supreme Court on June 19th. What was the final decision?
It was decisive. They ordered the Karnataka government to ensure thug life could be screened safely, full stop. That meant providing security for theaters, actors, producers, audiences, everyone involved. And crucially, they completely shut down any talk of Hassan needing to apologize. Justice Guion had that great line, "If you're hurt by statements, file a defamation case. You cannot take the law into your hands." It was a powerful defense of free speech principles.
Okay, let's talk about this mob rule aspect, the elephant in the room, because it seems central to this whole thing. The KFCC, the film chamber, they actually admitted in court that they succumbed to mob pressure. I mean, that's quite an admission, isn't it? An organization for cinema caving to threats. What does that tell us about groups like the Karnataka Rakshana Dike? There were reports they threatened serious violence, targeting minorities, even referencing past riots.
It's incredibly disturbing because it shows how non-state groups can effectively hold the law hostage through fear. And look, this Karnataka incident, while shocking, it isn't isolated. It's part of a wider, very worrying pattern in India. We've seen it before. The huge protests and vandalism around the film Padmavat, stand-up comedians like Munawar Farooqi facing threats, show cancellations, writers like Salman Rushdie, obviously. Even poets the court mentioned this aren't immune. You had Rajya Sabha MP Imran Pratapgarhi facing an FIR in 2025 over a poem. It feels like this culture of being easily offended and using that offense to shut down expression has become really widespread.
Yeah, that Supreme Court comment about the no end to hurting sentiments in India really lands, doesn't it? It makes you really think, are we actually at a point where one comment about language history can cause statewide protests and potentially derail a, 30 crore rupee film? The scale seems off.
Absolutely. And the economic consequences are real and significant. Estimates suggested Thug Life could lose maybe 35 to 40 crore rupees just in Karnataka. The producers themselves were claiming a hit of around 30 crore. And think about the smaller single-screen cinemas. They are already struggling against multiplexes, streaming. They needed this film. Instead, they face huge losses plus the risk of piracy when screenings get delayed. Eventually, Karnataka's deputy CM D.K. Shivakumar did call for respecting the court order, but, a lot of damage was already done by then.
Right. And through all of this pressure, this chaos, you have Kamal Haasan himself, just unwavering. I mean, he's this massive cultural figure, filmmaker, now a member of parliament too. And he just refused to cave to the demands. Despite the pressure, despite the potential financial hit, remember, his last big film, Vikram, apparently made 22 crore in Karnataka. So the stakes for Thug Life were high. He sent that letter to the KFCC, tried to clarify, saying it was genuine affection for Karnataka, for the Rajkumar family, legendary ties there, said his words were misunderstood, but critically, no apology. He just held the line.
And that stand is exactly why the Supreme Court's ruling feels like such a win. Not just for him, but for anyone who thinks art should provoke, maybe challenge, maybe even make it a bit uncomfortable sometimes. The court basically said, mobs don't get to decide what we see or say. They upheld the Constitution's promise of free expression, and they sent a very clear message to state governments. Your job is to protect rights, not to manage the feelings of vigilante groups. That affidavit from the Karnataka government promising security later, that came because the Supreme Court pushed them, shows the power of a strong judicial stand.
Still, you have to wonder why this litany of hurt sentiments, as the court put it, is so persistent in India. It's such a diverse place. It often feels like some groups use outrage almost like a tactic,
Yeah.
A way to gain influence or visibility. And the KFCC admitting they succumbed to mob pressure. I mean, that just felt like such a letdown from an organization that's supposed to champion films.
It really did. It highlights how fear can make even established bodies compromise their core principles. This whole saga really puts a spotlight on how fragile things can be when the state is slow to act, or when private groups choose, the path of least resistance instead of standing firm.
So as we wrap this up, what are the big takeaways here for us, for you listening? Well, first, maybe it's about those institutional bodies, like the KFCC. This case showed how they can become these weak points, buckling under pressure instead of protecting their own industry's rights. That felt like a real aha moment, actually. Second takeaway has to be the role of state governments. They absolutely have to step up, provide security, protect constitutional rights. Their inaction early on clearly made things worse.
And I'd add a third point. We need to be willing to call out these outrage merchants, as I called them earlier, the groups who kind of weaponize culture and offense. We need to put pressure on organizations to actually stand up for artistic freedom, not just fold when things get loud. But, the story also shows the resilience of art. Haasan didn't back down. The Supreme Court backed him up. And those fans, trekking across state lines, it shows that expression finds a way.
It really does. So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to chew on from this whole deep dive. How do we, as a society, really strike that balance between respecting the genuine, deeply felt sentiments of all kinds of different groups and protecting that fundamental right to free expression? Especially when, like here, you get big money involved and real threats of violence. Is it really enough to just say, don't like it, don't watch it? Or do we need something more? Maybe a deeper shift in how we react when we hear something we disagree with or find offensive, if we want to keep our creative spaces truly free and vibrant. Something to think about. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.